Welcome to Fire University. This is a podcast dedicated to fire ecology and management within the Natural Resource University Podcast Network. My name is Dr. Marcus Lashley. I'm a wildlife biologist, an assistant professor of disturbance ecology at the University of Florida, and a lifelong hunter that's passionate about wildlife conservation and management. In this podcast, I will interview scientists and professionals not only on the latest research in fire ecology, but also about their experiences, in hopes that you as the listeners can learn why fire ecology is important and also how you can use it to meet your natural resource management goals. So let's get to the burning questions in Fire University. Hey everybody, welcome back to Fire University. We're going to have another episode for Wild Turkey Week. So for those of you that are turkey enthusiasts out there, thanks for listening in. Hope you're enjoying this content. I certainly have been enjoying producing it. And today I'm pretty excited about this episode because we have Chipper Gibbes with Whitetail Properties. He's a private landowner and also works with Whitetail Properties. Chipper, known you for a while, and I really appreciate you taking some time to come on here and talk to us about what you're doing with fire.
Well, thank you, Marcus. It's a pleasure to be on today, and I always enjoy getting to talk with you about fire and turkeys and all of the above. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. Well, it's really, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you don't have much on it because it seems like every time I turn around, you're sending me photos of fires you're setting. You've definitely seemed to have become a pyromaniac, so to speak. So I thought it'd be fun to talk to you about some of the things that I know you've got going on your land and why you're doing those things, maybe a little bit about how you're doing it, and then what benefits are you seeing from those practices?
Sure. I guess a couple of years ago, I really kind of shifted my focus to turkeys a little bit more, and knowing that I wanted to do that, fire became a key component of that. And the first thing I did on my place is I cut some timber. And specifically, I widened the majority of my roadways. In other words, I put 30 to 40 feet on average on each side of most of my developed roads through the property. And that did several things for me. It allowed a lot of sunlight to hit the ground, and it gave the roads actually, the opportunity to dry out faster so I could actually work them better, could access the property better. And I could either use those areas either to manage just native plants, or I could plant a food plot, or I could really do anything on it I wanted to, including burning. And I have found it to be a pretty effective way because turkeys like to walk roadways and, when they're bugging and, raising poults and things like that. And also thin the rest of my pine plantation on my property at the same time, and also did some patch clear cuts in some strategic areas. And I really set the place up for the sunlight to hit the ground. So now I can manipulate the vegetation. I can set it back whenever I want to on rotation, and try to keep most of that area in a vegetation type that's going to benefit turkeys, whether it be nesting or poult rearing or whatever's needed.
Yeah. Now, I really like that practice that you've implemented. And I think that's something that is probably overlooked, but probably available to a lot of landowners, and that daylighting that you're talking about. How wide was it that you made the roads?
I'm gonna say on average probably 10 yards on each side of my road. And you can adjust that. I have some areas that are wider and some that are maybe not as wide, but it's a pretty significant widening, maybe more than some people would be comfortable with. But I really wanted to have some more openings on my place because I felt like that was important.
Yeah. Well, in the initial year when you did that, you went in and planted some cool season food plots, right? Or
I
not
did.
necessarily on all of it, but on a large portion. So what was your thought process when you were doing that?
Well, initially I wanted to get the roadsides to a point to where I could either disc them, burn them, or really do anything I wanted to. In other words, I had
Mm-hmm.
some stumps there I had to deal with. So what I did on some of it, I had a contractor come in and grind the stumps along the road
Mm-hmm.
with forestry mulchers,
Yeah.
and I immediately disc the ground in the fall. I did this in September and October, so it was a fall disturbance to
Mm-hmm.
that ground. So I went ahead, since I had fresh dirt, and I planted. Um, I think I planted wheat and crimson clover on the majority of it,
Mm-hmm.
and the clover did pretty well. Obviously, people, you know that on a first year food plot, sometimes you face a few challenges with your soil amendments and things like that. But overall, it
Mm-hmm.
did pretty well. And
Yeah.
what I found out was that disturbance in the fall really benefited. I had a lot of ragweed and good plants come back that are, I guess, good for all types of wildlife. So
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty much what I did. I wasn't necessarily going to plant that ground every year. I may plant some of it. I may rotate it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I planted most of it that first year because I had a lot of fresh dirt, and I just decided to plant it. So
Yeah. Well, it's probably uh, a good way to establish some ground cover really quickly that helps with erosion or whatever if you're in a situation, but also is really attractive that first season, obviously for deer in the fall and then turkeys in the spring. But yeah, that was kind of interesting to me and striking to me when I saw some of those places where you had planted, the wheat and clover together, and then by the time we were around to brood rearing that following year, it was pretty darn good brood rearing cover because of all the native plants that responded, like ragweed, you said. A whole bunch of native forbs that responded to that fall disking really positively.
it was kind of neat, though. It was beautiful in the spring when the crimson clover, went to seed. It
Hmm.
was very pretty riding through the property, seeing all that. But then when when the clover started, you know, ending its life cycle,
Hmm.
going backwards, and weed plants and other beneficial forbs and stuff coming up through the dead clover, and it went straight from clover to, in very short order, there were ragweed plants that were 4 to 6 inches tall, and it was right about the time that turkey poults would start hatching, and they had a system through the entire place to where if there was a hen nested 100 yards off the road, she could probably get them into something that was pretty beneficial for a small poult quickly without having to travel too far.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that is one major advantage that you've created with that. I think there are some other ones that I want to pick your brain about, but yeah, just having that early succession, which is one thing, the high quality early succession is one thing that I see missing all over the landscape. I mean, it's just not there. Certainly not when it is there. It's usually not juxtaposed to nesting cover where hens can get into it really quickly after rearing, after hatching those poults, which is pretty important, especially when they're really tiny. So yeah, that's something not only is the road letting you access your property, but it's also distributing high quality early succession across the property to make it readily uh, accessible, I guess, from a
Right.
hen with those young poults. So definitely really cool. And it was awesome to see you, go from thinning and applying that road widening to really quick order, having a high quality food source for deer hunting and then turkeys during the spring, and then that transitioning right into some really high quality brood rearing cover, which sounded like on your property was probably lacking before that, right?
Right. And what some people may be thinking is that, stump grinding can be pretty expensive endeavor. It's on a per hour basis, it costs a pretty good bit. But I had some roads that I did not do that with, and I just relied on fire to keep it set back, and I'll just allow the stumps to rot over time, and ultimately you'll have an opening that you can use equipment in over time if you want to take a slower approach that's less expensive, and you really get just as much benefit out of disturbing it with fire as you do with disking it up or planting something. So I don't want all the listeners to think that you have to use stump grinding techniques and more expensive techniques to get to that point. You can do it another way.
Right. It just allows you to get there a little faster.
That's right.
Sort of condensing that cost. Yeah, that's a really good point. Another thing, I know we've talked about it, and you've done quite a bit of it now, where you've kind of feathered off of a lot of those daylighted roads down.
Yes.
I guess a lot of your roads are kind of on the spine of hilltops, or at least that's the way I see
That's
it
right.
when I'm looking at it. And then you've gone in and started feathering off of those down into your pine stands. So what are you trying to accomplish there, and what kind of describe what that looks like?
Well, I'm trying to create a transition zone between my roadsides and the forest, basically. And you're going to let a certain amount of daylight in to the edge of the forest anyway, just because you have that nice wide road.
Sure.
But you can do other practices like hack and squirt, and you can dead and undesirable trees right on that transition zone to allow even more sunlight. And you're creating a situation where you can use your roadside as a fire break. So you can light your fire right along that fire break and let it run off in the woods and terminate down in the forest a little bit further. And you can style a lot of your burns that way. And you can also use regular timber thinning practices, like in a logging situation, if you want to feather that edge also. And I guess the best way to describe it, it's really just a transition zone between what I would consider either pine forest or a mixed hardwood stand as it approaches that opening. I don't know if that's a good way to describe it, but no, I think it seems like turkeys like to use that quite a bit.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And that's one of the things I really love about what you're doing is first of all, like you said, you've got a road that is a fire break. And on the opposite side of the stand, because of the way the roads are on the spine, it kind of transitions ultimately down into a low area that's wet, which is a natural fire break on the other side.
Right.
So you've created a situation where it's really easy for you to accomplish your burning. So I love that. The other thing that I think is underappreciated is exactly what you're saying. Rather than having a hard edge where you have this really high sunlight opening that you've created, transitioning very quickly into a closed canopy forest that has a lot of sunlight and mid-story in it in a lot of cases, you've taken a really active approach of trying to create the slow transition. And basically you're transitioning very slowly in the amount of sunlight that's reaching the forest floor, also with the disturbance, having the fire, you're disturbing the very high sunlight starting there and then running it down into those stands. And I think that's a really awesome way to set up the property so that you guarantee that you always have a diversity in light conditions and stand structure and disturbance regimes distributed throughout the entire property. I think that's a phenomenal way to accomplish that.
Right. And it also gets back to the point too, is most landowners are limited in time, and they may not have the time or resources to tackle their whole property at one time. So if you start at the road and you just creep away from the road with your management practices, even if you have some spots that are down deeper in your forest that haven't been addressed, that may not have as the ideal habitat, I mean, not habitat, but the ideal vegetation type, it kind of focuses your efforts a little bit more, and you don't feel like you're having to bite off so much at once as a landowner. Because I know doing the practices can seem a little daunting, because you feel like you'll never get it all done, but you're just doing little bits and pieces of it over time. But that also creates that diversity too that you brought up.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I've heard people said, and have said a few times before, you don't eat an elephant all at once, you eat it one bite at a time, right? And that's what you're talking about. And by doing this, you're making your property really efficient to apply the practices that you want to meet your objectives. You're making it really efficient to do so, but you're also kind of combining those little pieces, right? You're not doing it all at once, but you're combining them so that they begin to augment one another. You're creating high quality brooding cover directly adjacent to where the high quality nesting is, even though you may have a large portion of your landscape that you don't have either yet. You when you're creating both of them, you're doing it right together. So that, I think that's a really great way to approach this, to start transitioning the property. So when you've gone in, I know you've done a lot of handwork, with TSI or forest stand improvement, I guess, in your case. What was the problem that you were having where it was causing you to go in and get pretty aggressive in that feathering? I think it's probably a common problem that a lot of people have.
Sweet gum encroachment, maybe.
Yeah.
Is that what you're looking for?
Well, I was just curious if you had something that was more problematic than that.
Japan grass.
Oh yeah, that's definitely another one that a lot of people have. Yeah. So what were you doing about the sweet gum?
It depends on the size of the sweet gum. If I'm targeting smaller sweet gum shrub type, at the shrub type level, you can just spot spray those and kill them pretty easy. But if they're a little bit bigger, I was taking a chainsaw, and if the tree was 3-4 inches and no more than 3-4 inches in diameter, I would just cut it completely off at waist height and then spray the stump with squirt ball. And the reason I did it at waist height is you don't want to be bending over trying to spray stuff on the ground, so you could comfortably walk through the woods, and you can have a guy running the chainsaw and have somebody with the squirt bottle, and you could just walk through and you can kill a whole bunch of trees at one time. And if the tree was much bigger, to where it would either cause a dangerous situation to fell it or whatever, I would just girdle it and then spray the wound and kill it that way. So and if I ran into Chinese tallow or sweet gum or any tree that I felt undesirable at that point, I would either cut it down and kill it, or if I wanted to make a stump sprout out of it, I would cut that one off and not spray it. And I usually would cut those down closer to ground level. So, if I had somebody running the squirt bottle behind me, they would know that was a tree I didn't want to treat. So,
so some trees that are really good resprouting, high quality browse for deer, you're just top killing those essentially down to the ground. So
if I found like an elm or even an oak tree that I didn't want for some reason. I know a lot of people like oak trees and don't want to cut them down, but if you have too many of them, that can be a problem as well. So you can, a oak stump sprout is pretty, highly desirable for deer. But again, we're talking about turkeys. So, if you're wanting to eliminate, and make it to where there's not as many trees, you may want to go ahead and kill some of those trees if your focus is for turkeys. But I don't think it hurts you to leave a few of them, because again, you're creating more diversity, and it's more of a shrub. I guess a stump sprout would be more of a shrub type effect there for a little while anyway.
Yeah, that structure, there certainly doesn't hurt to have some around.
That's right.
I try to get people thinking of context a lot, and you want diversity. It just happens that you're often missing some particular types of diversity, which is what we talk about all the time, especially
Right.
the high sunlight, high disturbance frequency areas. Those are really commonly missing. But that doesn't mean that you want every square inch of everything to be under that management strategy.
Exactly.
So, you mentioned another one, and I know I've gotten plenty of questions, and there's a lot of interest related to invasive species. And one that you're dealing with is the Japanese stilt grass. So,
Right.
how are you dealing with that? How have all these practices affected that, and what are you doing about it?
Man, I'm still trying to figure out the best way to manage Japan grass in an effective manner. It can become overwhelming because it can dominate a good portion of low-lying areas.
Sure.
The best way to control it is to spray it. The problem you run into is it grows in areas where equipment is it's not an easily accessible area with a tractor or bigger piece of equipment. Even four-wheelers in some situations can not access these areas. So what I did is I kind of took the same approach of the eating the elephant concept. I tried to focus on areas where I could get my tractor, my roadsides that I widened up. If I had Japan grass growing in those openings, I could kill it pretty easily with a tractor and spray rig. And when you get off of the beaten path a little bit, you just have to, you're pretty much reduced to backpack work or a four-wheeler if you can get in certain areas. I can tell you this, that the fire does not do anything. Dormant season fire does not do anything to control Japan grass. If anything, it makes it grow more because you basically prepare a seed bed for it in the dormant season, and it sprouts and it goes. Turning an area that was infested with Japan grass in the dormant season is if I had a plan to get in there and spray it right when it emerged. I think you could really be effective killing it right when it emerged. But if you're not going to be able to get in there and spray it, I wouldn't burn it because it's just going to make it flourish. And that's the one thing about land ownership that people need to understand is most people have problems with getting sunlight to the ground. They and then they start learning how to get the sunlight. They get all the openings set up the way they want them. They get plenty of sunlight hitting the ground. Then you have another problem. It's invasive species, because if there's not a good plant growing there, there's going to be a bad plant growing there. Something's going to be growing. And, where I am in the Southeast, there's probably 5 to 10 of them on my place that are really problematic. And, I don't want to be all doom and gloom here, but that is the biggest management challenge I face. It's not burning or figuring out when and where to burn or planting food plots. It's battling invasive species, because that Japan grass, it makes such a mat on the ground. Turkey poults can't navigate it. It is unusable ground for a turkey poult. It's so thick at ground level, it's useless for them.
Yeah. Did you, before you started going in and aggressively increasing sunlight and disturbing, did you have any Japan grass in the landscape?
Unfortunately, I did, because Japan grass to me is shade tolerant, but it does well with direct sunlight. So I really can't figure out how to the sunlight makes it worse, but it's shade tolerant. I mean, I had it in a lot of my bottoms that were closed canopy.
Well, I just wonder, maybe is there a lesson there? What I assume it was probably more restricted and not as much of a problem, and then you went in and did some of these things, and then it invaded. Is that?
Yes, you can course, the way it reproduces is water carries the seed, and if you're bush hogging on your place and moving equipment around, it gets on tractor tires, it gets on boots. You can spread it throughout your property by unintentionally that way. So
yeah,
it's an annual plant and it reseeds vigorously. So
yeah, or if your crew that's in there harvesting timber is on a different property that has it, and they don't properly treat the equipment before coming on, then they could bring it on that way, right?
Absolutely.
And I know there have been instances where that may have happened, and there are a lot of precautions that are being taken by, from landowners and also the folks that are harvesting timber. So, but that's something that people should be aware of, is make sure that that's being done before someone comes on your property. There's plenty of species like Japan grass that could be spread that way, and we definitely want to avoid that. So I just wonder, in your case, do you think that you would have been able to get a handle on it beforehand if you'd gone in and aggressively attacked the Japan grass before you got aggressive with these other practices?
If I knew what I know now, I probably could have had a better chance of controlling it. It's now, you and I've made a plan of trying to attack it. We've tried to basically cut it off and isolate it at this point by disconnecting the road, by spraying it along the roadways, getting it out of the line of fire, making sure there's none in your food plots. And if you get it isolated, you could start working on it a little bit, but I don't know that I'll ever get rid of it. I don't know that I'll ever get rid of it. I really don't. I think it's there to stay. I think you just have to treat it like sweet gum encroachment, and you have to control it as best you can. And always have plenty of areas scattered throughout your property where it doesn't exist, that turkeys can use.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's a good way to think about it, is it's sort of the opposite concept of what you're trying to produce for turkey habitat. You're trying to do the opposite for the for the Japan grass. You're trying to isolate it. You want to make sure that it's not on your roads where you're going to continuously be carrying it around on your equipment. It's also happens to be the easiest place for you to attack it. So make sure that you get rid of it in those places that you could carry it around, or the places that you can really easy wipe it out. And then when you get it isolated into places, you can sort of chip away at it. And like you said, you may not ever get rid of it completely, but you could at least try to make sure that it's not in your places that are going to be really high production for your game species of choice.
That's right.
So unfortunately that's one of those things that's really hard to deal with. And like you said, it's probably not the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of landowners, but it certainly is a major problem for a lot of landowners. And Japan grass is just one of them.
Well, the good news is it's easy to kill. There's several chemical options. It has a long growing season. I first see it emerge and germinate in turkey season. I've seen it germinate as early in March around here, late March, certainly by April. And it's just a little bitty, the quicker you can get it before it really starts getting bigger, the better. But I've sprayed it and successfully killed it all the way into late June and July before I want to say it starts bolting, putting seed out sometime around mid to late August on our place. You want to deal with it well before then, but you have, the good news is you have several months that you can really kill it good on your place to give you plenty of time to try to treat as many acres as you can. And like I said, clethodim works extremely well on it. It's a good option for if you're not trying to kill other beneficial plants. Glyphosate obviously will smoke it, but I would recommend using the glyphosate in areas that are so infested you're really not going to lose anything by nuking the entire area. So
yeah, some of those patches, when it gets really thick in there, I mean, it literally is the only plant at risk, because it's drown out the rest of the diversity to its entirety.
Mazapic or plateau is another option that has some soil activity that will kill it, and then it'll be like a pre-emerge, I guess, after that. It'll suppress it throughout the entire growing season, I believe. I haven't done a whole lot with plateau just because I'm a little intimidated by it from a soil activity standpoint, and it takes such a little rate per acre. You got to really have your spray rigs calibrated appropriately, and so I don't have as much experience with that as I do with glyphosate or clethodim. Most food plot managers use those two. So
I got you. So, well, we've been talking about all these practices and how you've set up and the problems that you're having. Well, what about the successes? What are you seeing happen from all this work?
Well, I guess a little history behind my place. We have some pine plantation. I had a lot of closed canopy issues before I really started learning about all this stuff, and I went through a phase where we didn't have a whole lot of turkeys on our place. You would always have a few, but it wasn't, the 80s and early 90s around this part of the country. And I think most everybody else in the Southeast has the same story to tell. But as I started doing these practices, I started seeing more and more turkeys. I started seeing more hens with poults using the property. And of course, you experienced some of this. You and I rode around together and looked, and I think we had identified somewhere between 30 and 50 poults that were of flying age this past summer. So I think it's been a great success. I mean, my turkey numbers seem to be increasing rather than going the other way. And, some other things that may be more of an indicator, I guess, than an indication that you're doing the right thing is I'm seeing more quail on the place. And the last time I saw a quail on our place, I was a little boy, and it's been, decades ago. Yeah. So I know I got at least 3 to 4 coveys on the place now that I see regularly. And I just like having them there. I don't ever have any real intention of hunting them or having a huntable population, because I know the hills you have to climb there, but it sure is nice to hear a quail whistle every now and then, see someone across the road or flush one with the tractors, a covey with the tractor. And I wasn't seeing any of that before I started, all the burning and all the manipulation of the vegetation, letting the sunlight hit the ground. And so I would say it's been a great success. I will say this, it's not an immediate response. I mean, it's going to take a few years for, a sound response to happen. But if you stay with it and you enjoy doing all these practices, it's very rewarding.
Yeah. Well, I think you're exactly right. The quail, even if you never intend to hunt it, it's really cool to see that species return. And it is the canary in the coal mine. It's a really good indication if they are around that you're doing some things right. Particularly with the poult production, there are a lot of similarities in things that quail can deal with and where you produce a lot of poults. And that was really cool riding around and coming up on some huge broods, several broods worth of turkeys that are being recruited. That was really cool. So, another way that I guess you could kind of turn around what you said. It's not going to happen immediately. The flip side of that coin is you're not going to do it all once and then be done, right? It's a continuing thing. But I know, at least from watching you and then from my own personal experience, once you get going and get to really doing these things and start seeing benefits, it sort of becomes your pastime at that point where it got to be really fun, where you're looking forward to getting out there and getting some of these things done, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the most enjoying time of being a landowner is getting out there and getting to do these things. The hunting is icing on the cake to me. I mean, everybody wants to go and hunt and have a good time that way, but when you really buy into some of these practices and you start enjoy doing that, I mean, that just completes it's a year round process. And that's what being a landowner is to me. It's what makes it so valuable for people.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things that you just made me think of. What does your burn schedule look like? You just said it was a year-round affair with all these practices. What does your burning look like?
Well, I've been waiting to talk about this because there's a lot of people out there that I don't know whether they think I'm crazy or what, but all I'm doing is listening to all the good research and science that y'all are producing, and I'm applying it.
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line is, and you've said it 1,000 times on this podcast, that most people burn this time of year when, it's basically dormant season. Everything's dead.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when everybody burns for several reasons. It's easy to burn. I personally don't think it's easier to burn this time of year, but some people think it is easier. They, obviously think that they're not damaging trees, and
mm-hmm.
there's a whole wide array of things that people use for reasons. But I burn all year long. I burned some in the dormant season. I plan on burning a few patches in the dormant season, but if I get a good burn day throughout a calendar year, I don't care if it's December, I don't care if it's August, January, July, I'm going to burn something. Mm-hmm. If I get a good burn day. And it might not be but 1 or 2 or 8 acres or maybe 5 acres or whatever, but something's going to get burned because I'm wanting to put as much diversity in my property as I can possibly put. And when you burn from July on all the way to October, I think you have more opportunity then to move the needle with turkeys, deer, every wildlife species out there than you do in the dormant season. I think there's plenty enough time for dormant season fire. I think some of it should take place.
Sure.
But I'm a strong proponent of burning when it's 100 degrees outside. I mean, people are going to probably send me hate mail and stuff after I do this, but if you do it right, I think it's easier to burn. It's sometimes harder to get a good burn day, and it's sometimes harder to get a stand to burn like you think it should burn. But I can tell you right now, I don't have any trouble with my fire getting out. It's less risky. Mm-hmm. You can use more natural fire breaks. The crew you have to help monitor the fire doesn't have to be as big.
Sure.
Yes, you have stable conditions in the dormant season, but I'm telling you right now, fire can get loose so much easier this time of year than it does in June, July, August, September. Mm-hmm. Recently here, we have had problems. The fire department has been busy every day, trying to help people control different brush fires and things like that. And I'm telling you, you can burn in the growing season, and you can eliminate a lot of that risk by learning a little bit about it. And the flush of vegetation that you produce after a growing season fire is unbeatable. I don't think you can plant a food plot. You certainly can't do it for the amount of money you're going to invest in it. But every time you do a 2-acre burn in the woods or in an old field or whatever, that time of the year, you've basically just created a food plot, and for very little money.
Yeah.
Just a little of your time, and it's enjoyable. And I don't know what else you want me to say about it, but
no, just you're on your horse.
I've gotten my opportunity to talk about it, but
yeah,
I think it is I think it is a myth that it is safer to burn in the dormant season. I think it is easier to have more problems that time of year. I'm not saying don't burn in the dormant season. There's a time and place for it.
Sure.
But I don't think that the majority of your property should be burned off in the dormant season. I think from a diversity standpoint in your vegetation type, I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you were to burn 75% of your entire property that time of year. I'd much rather see someone do it through the whole calendar year.
Sure.
Create smaller burns. Doesn't even have to be a complete burn. It can just be, just kind of meander through there with a low intensity fire, and amazing things happen.
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple of things that we could unpack related to that. And in some systems, I guess it may be easier to burn for either because it's safer, or it also may be the only time, like if you're in the upland hardwoods, for instance, you may not be able to get it to burn in the growing season for a large portion of it. So, there are reasons why it may differ a little bit from you, but for a large portion of our landowners in the deep South where you are, you can have a lot of great success burning those other times. And like you said, you really can benefit from the diversity in timing to enhance, especially for turkey. But you can get a lot of other benefits, like high quality food production for deer, for instance, by altering that timing. So good points. Another thing that I wanted to add, go ahead.
I was just going to also say that I didn't, I'm sort of making this spiel based on my experiences on my own property. I understand there are different fuel loads and things that would create a situation where you couldn't burn at a certain time in the summer because you could have some problems. But as long as you understand the fuel loads that you have to deal with when you're burning and how they're going to respond, and run some test fires to make sure, most of the time you're going to be pretty good. But there's always an exception, and there's always a situation that would make it when you shouldn't burn, obviously. I'm not saying that, all situations are the same.
Sure. Well, that's what I invited you, is to talk about your experiences on your place. Right. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It's important for people to go and get their training and their experience in the context that they're going to be burning in, to make sure they're doing things safely. I think that that's a given at this point. You need to go do that. But, and from your, a lot of our listeners are in a very similar context to you. So I think your experience, leading the way with this is valuable for those folks. Another thing that I was going to add a minute ago when you had that follow up, going back to the analogy with eating the elephant, we eat it one bite at a time, and you also don't eat it. Even when you're eating it one bite at a time, you don't eat it all on the same day, right? So one thing that could really be helpful for a lot of people, if you're challenged, you're trying to do all these things and you're just challenged for time, opening up the burn window like you have done has just given you such a huge opportunity to make a big impact on your land, because you're just waiting on a good burn day. And when you get one, you go bite off a little chunk. And if you do that year round, then all of a sudden you've made a huge impact at the property scale. Whereas if you had tried to do all of that in a few weeks in March or February, you probably wouldn't have been able to accomplish all of that. And it wouldn't have been as high quality as it for your objectives as it has been to spread it out like that either. So,
Well, anytime you can gain burn days in a calendar year, that's a benefit, because we run into some challenges with getting everything that you have planned to burn in a year. And you've taught me time and time again that yes, if dormant season is your only option, it's obviously better to do that than to not burn at all. But if you do have that option and that flexibility of trying to, conduct a small burn or something on a non-traditional time of year, I think the benefits are just outstanding if you get that opportunity.
Sure. Yeah, good points. There was one other thing that just came to mind that we're kind of stepping back for a minute, because it's something I think that you're doing that from a strategy standpoint that is really interesting. And I'm thinking about some of those areas that you have that are regeneration, that you're going in and burning.
Right.
So I think this last hunting season, you took advantage of it really strongly. But what are you doing with these areas that you've kind of broken up into two burn units, so to speak, on either side of your shooting lane? Can you
And you're
describe
talking
that?
about the areas that I clear cut that are regenerating naturally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Well, for deer hunting purposes, I cut what some people call turkey feet or wagon spokes. Basically made a narrow lane that I could plant if I wanted to, or it could serve as a fire break if I wanted to. And
so in these clear cuts, how big are we talking about?
I would say they could be as small as 5 acres. They could be as big as 10 or 15 acres. I have them various shapes and sizes. They're not all just blocks. They're
another way that you're increasing diversity, just changing the shape and size of these regen areas. Okay, go ahead.
Well, it does several things. It gives you another option for food plots if you want to, or to have a fire break, and you can further divide those regenerated areas into different management units. Even on just at the micro level, you can burn one side of the lane this time of the year, or document when you burned it, and then next year you can go back and burn the other side, and you can put it on a burn rotation as small as you want to get the units in a particular, we can call it a field or a regenerated area or clear cut, or I kind of call them fields because this was a pine plantation that was planted on a field. So you remove the pines.
So now it's really an old field.
That's what I would say. I mean, it's not like you cut a hardwood forest and you regenerated a hardwood forest at the ground level. It was you grew a crop for 30 years and then basically removed it.
Yeah.
So, but I thought it was a great success this year from a deer hunting standpoint. You had all this thick cover right next to a food source, and mature bucks seem to come out and feed in it earlier in the day, and they felt totally protected because they just had to step out of what I would consider they were probably bedding in there, especially on cold days, and they didn't have to travel very far to it and come out earlier. But from a turkey standpoint, I think it creates another area for a turkey to walk and feed, and they have nesting in close proximity to it. They have potential brood rearing habitat close to it because you can burn and set it back to set the succession back to a level that's beneficial for them.
Sure. So just to kind of, I guess, lay out that whole plan there and what you're doing, because just to give you some context on why I'm zoning in on this, I get asked all the time. It's one of the most common questions that I get. How old does the stand, whatever? Most of the time they're talking about pines, but most people are asking me, how old does the forest need to be before before I get fire in it? When can I go apply fire? And of course, that I hate saying it, but it always depends on what your objective is. So in this case,
Sure.
you've gone in and intentionally clear cut an area. What is your intent with that area from here on?
My
Like, do you,
intent is to continue to run fire through it on a rotation, and
so you've essentially gotten fire into it right away within a few years
that's right.
of cutting it.
I'm
Okay.
not, and I need to caveat that by saying I'm not going to replant pines on this area.
Yeah.
I'm intending on leaving it as a naturally regenerated. It's going to probably more resemble an old field ultimately than it will a regenerated forest or something like that.
Right. So your goal is not to regenerate a new pine plantation that you're going to cut down the road. You
Yes,
really
for that
want to keep
particular
it,
area. Yes.
yeah, for that. Yeah. So, but this is a strategy that you're taking because it's really high quality bedding cover, particularly for deer, right?
That's right.
You've got that concentrated. If you think about, okay, we've got this 10-acre block of clear cut that's now old field, and you've split that at least in half, and in some cases you've done more than that, where on one side you have it at a stage that's really high quality bedding, and then you have a lane in the middle, this sort of your hunting lane, and you've got some that you've done with different things with. Some of them you planted, and some of them I think you just disc or whatever, right?
Correct.
And then the other side is more recent since the fire.
That's right.
And the idea with that is that now that's a high quality food source directly adjacent to a high quality bedding source with a lane in the middle that gives you an ambush.
That's right.
And then on the side that you have burned more recently, that is high quality foraging for deer, but also brooding potentially, especially right after the fire for turkeys, and then nesting as well for turkeys. And then I guess a couple of years down the road, they just switch sides, right? Once the bedding cover is getting a little bit overgrown on one side and you're kind of moving out of that nesting structure on the other side, you just apply fire to the bedding cover side that's sort of transitioning into something you don't want. That reverts it back to the brooding nesting structure and forage for deer, and now the cover's on the other side. I really love that strategy, and you're kind of taking advantage of producing some high quality habitat in an arrangement that makes the animals that you're doing it for accessible.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to picture what this is going to look like down the road, but as I conduct burns, you're going to have a few trees get through the fire. You're going to have, you're not going to, it's not going to be just a monoculture. You're going to have I'm hoping to have almost a savanna effect, like a oak savanna type effect, where a few trees escape and the fire and you continue to burn. And, if something happens though, and I get a problem where the fire doesn't do right one year, or if I don't get to burn it or something, and I get some sweet gum encroachment, I can always go in there with a hack and squirt technique and thin that out, or I guess in a terrible case, you could even spray it if you had to, but I think that would be the last resort, if you had a real problem with like invasive species or something that just got out of your control. But I'm going to let the fire dictate the way it looks. I'm going to try to let the fire just naturally put its stamp on this particular piece of ground and see how it does over time. And I think it'll get better and better. And I think it'll revert back to a look that Mother Nature had for it, before we started, doing things, hopefully. And, maybe it'll be something that my children can continue and continue to manage it in the same way. And I just think it's going to be dynamite for not only deer and turkeys, but, if you're into wildlife in general, I mean, it's songbirds. I mean, everything you can think of.
Yeah.
It's going to benefit from it.
Well, there's a couple of things about this. One, I love that, you're thinking about it over generations in your own family. That's cool. The other thing is, for folks they're following me at Dr. Disturbance, that account online, I'm posting a whole bunch of stuff about the history of the U.S. and some cool stuff about turkeys. And one thing that was really striking is when initially North America was mapped, a lot of it was called Grand Savannah or Big Savannah.
Mhm.
And at that point, there was a lot of turkeys on the landscape. In fact, I'm
Right.
going to post some stuff about this, about how many turkeys there was. It's kind of crazy what some of those early explorers wrote about turkeys. But so you're kind of envisioning this turning into something that's approximating a savanna, where you have essentially sparse trees with the developed understory of mixture of forbs and grasses and some woody encroachment a little later on in the process. But I think that's probably what you will see, and that's awesome. And that used to be what the U.S. looked like, or a large portion of it. Is virtually none of it now. But when it was like that, there were apparently turkeys sitting on top of each other in the trees.
Right.
And the last thing that I really love that you brought up is, we're sitting here talking about turkeys and benefiting deer with these practices, and you've even designed your properties so that you can use these practices to make your hunting experience better. And that's awesome. But we talked about quail a few minutes ago being the canary. Well, they're not just the canary for, deer and turkeys. They are the canary for sort of the health of the system. And the reality is, a whole bunch of our species of conservation concern are linked to that kind of habitat structure that quail do pretty well in. And they're a canary telling us how those other species of conservation concern are going to respond. We can get a good idea of that. And you're exactly right. There are a whole suite of species that are going to benefit that are non-game. And a lot of people may not even know what they are, and not realize it, or not care. But, the system is healthier because that usually is missing on the landscape. So really cool.
And what excites me about talking about it is if other landowners develop a similar passion for these type management practices,
Mm-hmm.
you could begin to change things. I can't do a whole lot to change the broad picture with just my property, but man, if I could get my neighbor to do the same thing, or even if one landowner was a little slow to buy in, you skipped it over, and then another guy or another landowner wanted to do the same thing. Next thing you know, you got a kind of a patchwork, at the 35,000 foot level, that you're starting to get more landowners that are really doing these practices. And when you do it on a broad scale, you can change a lot. And it's exciting to think about when, even somebody that had, 30 or 40 acres could, make a small difference.
Well, and if
So it doesn't have to be a huge property if everybody's kind of pulling in the same direction.
Exactly. Yeah. And everybody, big and small landowners can bite off chunks and start making a difference by us getting together. And that's one of the reasons I really appreciate you coming on the show, because if, hopefully some of those surrounding landowners or other folks in the South will hear what you're doing, and it can inspire them and help them to get going on it. And if we get more people doing that, maybe we can start moving the needle on turkeys and a lot of these other species of conservation concern at the same time.
Absolutely.
Well, I always like to kind of conclude with allowing you the opportunity to give some take-home messages or anything we haven't covered. So if you have anything that you want folks to know, be a good time.
Well, I think the first thing that people need to do is, if they're interested, I mean, if they're not interested in it, it's going to be difficult for them to really to buy into, you know, enjoying being out there and doing these types of things. But my first recommendation is I would listen to, there's so many good podcasts out there right now. This one in particular.
I appreciate the plug.
Yes, that talk about these things. And I have learned so much in the last, you know, 8 or 10 years, just, you know, attending a seminar or two or listening to these podcasts. And there's a lot of good information out there from scientists right now that you just need to start learning about it. You're not going to learn about it all in one day, but over the course of time, you can really pick up some pretty good techniques and tips. And then it's just a function of getting out on your land and testing some of it. And you don't have to go out, and if you want to learn how to burn, or if you want to go get more proficient or more comfortable at it, just go out there and burn, you know, an area as big as your living room. You don't have to burn 40 acres or 100 acres or whatever. Just go burn, just pick out a roadside or something and get a leaf blower and make you a fire lane around it and just burn a little, just conduct a small burn. And
yeah,
I think you'll get more and more comfortable with it. And as long as you respect it and learn about it and do it under the right conditions and take all the precautions, you'll get to where you're pretty good at it, you know? And, I know I've done a lot of trial and error. I'm not going to say I've never had any issues with it, but, for the most part, I really hadn't had anything happen that would be dangerous or anything like that. It's a natural process, and it's something that people really need to embrace and not be so intimidated by it. I mean, obviously you need to respect it, but there's no reason to be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Yes, I should say. And a little bit goes a long way, and the more comfortable you get, you can really change the way your property looks and the way game are attracted to it, and you can produce more game and
have a lot of fun doing it.
It's good for, that's right. You have a lot of fun doing it. It's something like you said, you basically turn it into a pastime at that point. You know, other generations get involved, and we don't need to just pass along hunting to the next generation. That's very important, but we also need to pass along, you know, the love of land and stewardship, I think is a good word.
Yeah.
You know, we're just borrowing the land for a little while is all we're doing. And what we do with it while we have it is important. And luckily, my job every day is with Whitetail Properties is to help people find that piece of ground that they can do all this stuff on. I mean, that to me that's the best part of my job is finding somebody a perfect place. And,
I bet that is fun.
Yeah. And, you know, people say, well, you sell land, don't you? Well, I don't sell land. Land sells itself. All I have to do is just be there for people to just help feed them all the right information and help them do their homework. And it's the easiest selling job in the world because the land takes care of that part of it, you know?
Yeah.
So
well, that's awesome.
Other take homes, I really, do you have anything that I missed? Or, you know, I could talk about this all day long. I mean,
yeah, I know you can. That's one of the reasons I wanted you. I know you're passionate about it, and you're an active user. You're applying, you know, a lot of the things that I say, you're applying them very well on your place. So I think that's valuable for folks to hear it from the practitioner, you know, the private landowner that's actually getting out there and getting stuff done. No, I mean, I think you've got a well-rounded set of information here that you've provided folks. So I appreciate that. Well, I guess you mentioned working for Whitetail Properties. How can people find you if they are, you know, interested in your services from that standpoint, or just asking questions?
Sure, they can call me or they can email me. My email address is chipper.gibbes. Gibbs is spelled Gibbes @ whitetailproperties.com. Send me an
Okay.
email or give me a call. Go to whitetailproperties.com and look me up, find my agent page, and you can find a lot of information about me there,
Hmm.
and as well as my contact information. It's a great
Yeah.
website, by the way. It's filled with a lot of good information. We have a
Mhm.
series called Land Beat that
Yeah.
I think you've been a part of that in the past. We have
Yeah.
some
Matter of fact, if you want to see some of the stuff with the daylighting and some of these other practices that we talked about, we did a couple of land beat videos that you guys have shared through your website, showing those practices.
right. You and I did a couple of them, and man, that was a fun couple of days when
Mhm.
we had a fresh burn that had just happened, and we
Yeah.
had some other burns that had been, responding. I guess it was, several weeks since the burn took place, so we could go around all those different areas
Mhm.
and just kind of take a look and talk about it. But the Land Beat series with Whitetail Properties is excellent. We have a lot of good professionals and scientists that come on there and
Mhm.
do different segments. And I mean, you can find anything from food plots all the way to timber stand improvement or burning or just
Mhm.
about any land oriented practice that you want to learn about. You can find it on there, and
Yeah.
it's pretty neat.
Yeah. I've enjoyed it myself. All right. Well, I appreciate all the great information and you sharing with the listeners all the things that you've been doing. I'm glad that you're enjoying it and getting to reap some of the benefits. And
I appreciate it, Marcus, and I can't thank you enough for all the hard work that you and your grad students put in to bring us all this good information. It's really cutting edge stuff, and I can't wait to see what the future holds with it.
well, I appreciate that. And I'm glad you brought the graduate students up because they're the ones doing all the work. I'm just telling people about it. Thanks, everybody.
Fire University is part of the Natural Resource University podcast network funded by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you like what you heard today in this episode, please follow us on all the social media platforms at UF Deer Lab.